So most Americans don't know this, but we're at war with these guys right here, the Houthis down in Yemen. And this is really flying under the radar. Personally, I feel like it's not getting anywhere near the attention that it should. And this little clip of their special forces, we're going to come back to this. We'll do a whole back half of this video, react to this 4-minute clip of them training to fight the Americans and the Israelis for what it's worth. Oh, the Brits as well. But nonetheless, I don't know what else you call this than a war. We've been conducting 38 days of consecutive military strikes against a singular group. Whether it's a group or a nation state, to get an idea, some context here, the last time the United States carried out this length of attacks, this duration of attacks, you got to go back to at least 2018-19, in the dying days of the Islamic State Caliphate in Syria. But even then, we might have hit 38 consecutive days of attacks. I doubt we hit the volume of munitions that are being used against Houthi targets right now. So this is something. It's telling. And whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, and we'll get into the rationale here in a moment, we should at least recognize that it's happening and that we are escalating the conflict day in and day out. Now, U.S. Central Command, Department of Defense, is putting out footage every single day showing our brave sailors, airmen, and Marines out there in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden conducting these strikes. It's nonstop. Again, every single day we're seeing new clips. We're not getting a lot in terms of the battle damage assessment. I do have this clip here to show you a little bit before and after of the Ras Isa port after the United States carried out a series of strikes there. By and large, we don't really know the effectiveness of the strikes at this point. The Trump administration has expanded the scope of viable targets. So under the Biden administration, they were largely going after missile and drone launch locations, sometimes after weapon storage facilities, but it was largely reactive. And this is where I think it's important to address the idea that something has changed. Again, you can argue for the better or for the worse. The Houthis are a bad group. I don't like them. I mean, look at their flag. Death to America, curse be upon the Jews. Like, this is not a group that likes us, not by a long shot. They're bad. It's a terrorist organization. Nobody's arguing that. This is not an apology for the Houthis. It's just the recognition that the United States is kind of ramping up military operations, again, kind of under the radar. Now, if we go back to the Biden administration attacks, again, relatively reactive. Already we've seen more strikes, more munitions used during just the last month or so of attacks under Trump than we did since November 2023 under Biden. Nonetheless, these operations were happening under the previous administration. So if you want to say that it started back in November 2023, that's fine. That's the origin of this series of attacks, which brings us into kind of what's happening here. Back in November 2023, after Israeli forces moved into the Gaza Strip following the October 7th massacre carried out by Hamas, the Houthis stood up and said, "It is our legal obligation to fight back against what we perceive as a genocide occurring in Gaza." And they used what they believed was the only method at their disposal, shutting down international shipping through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which we'll pull up a map of Yemen here. You can see this small strait that Houthi-controlled territory looks over. You can see how it doesn't take very much, a couple drones, a couple unmanned surface vessels, and international shipping just says, we're not going through there anymore. And that's essentially been the case now for much, coming on a year and a half, if you will. And shipping is still relatively depressed. So the Houthis said, we're going to continue to do this. And they've expanded their scope. At one point, it was just Israeli ships, then it was Israeli, British, and American ships, and then it was any ship that might actually go to an American, Israeli, or British port. And look, by and large, the targeting's been all over the place. And they've hit a lot of ships, which has served to further depress any international shipping through the region. The United States then began to conduct strikes against Houthi targets in response to this, saying we are there to protect international shipping. And we've even heard that under this administration as well. The argument in Signalgate about a month ago at this point, or a little less than a month ago, where we saw Vice President Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz going back and forth on why we're doing this. And it was all tied to protecting free shipping on the international seas. So you've got essentially two sides fighting two different wars, if that makes sense. The Houthis are saying, we're not necessarily attacking the Americans, although that's changing recently. They're saying, we just are trying to put some pressure on people to force Israel to leave the Gaza Strip, lift the siege of Gaza, and allow in humanitarian aid. That, for all the Houthi faults, and my God, there's a lot of them, they have been very consistent in that messaging from day one. Their strikes that they carried out yesterday, you will see that mentioned in their announcement. We will continue to do this until the siege of Gaza is lifted. We need to keep that back in mind. Now, this kind of gets us into, when do we call it a war, or like, what is that? What line needs to be crossed? And I get it. Here in the United States, or really around the world, like, nobody declares war anymore. So it's a bit of a problem. I feel like we still need a term to use there. Conflict maybe doesn't really do it. Skirmish, something has changed here. All right, so just earlier today, the United States announced that we carried out an airstrike in Somalia. I don't think anybody in the United States would say, yeah, we're at war in Somalia. You might group that under the overall global war on terror, but 2 drone strikes in the last 2-3 weeks, which is actually kind of an increase in of itself. I just don't think that fits the same label as what is happening in Yemen right now. And, I understand that people could push back on that and say, that's not fair. It's all the same, or the line was over here and we crossed it long ago. But there's something about continued military operations day in and day out with no clear end state, right? The United States is saying here, we're going to keep doing this until the Houthis stop. Well, there's no indication that they're stopping at all. So it just feels like this is very different than the one-off strike in Syria to kill an Islamic State leader or Al-Qaeda figure, something like that. But again, I understand that's somewhere that folks might want to push back, or could very easily push back on. Now, in turning to what the Houthis are doing at this point, because I feel like it's not just our actions against them. At one point, Al-Qaeda said they were at war with the United States, but we didn't really know that. So we weren't at war with them, if that makes sense. This is one where they're shooting at us too. And they're talking about this day in and day out. They just held like a security council meeting of sorts. I'll put up the picture here. I think that's the term they use, this fancy indoor camouflaged room. And they said they're just preparing future operations against the United States, preparing to respond against what they are calling American aggression. So we have entered their battle plans long ago. Now, what we've seen recently are some attacks against Israel, long-range drones and missiles. By and large, those all appear to have been intercepted mostly by Israel, or they've fallen apart en route. At one point, the Houthis had gotten, I think, a drone or two through Israeli air defense. Not recently, though. And those are relatively, they're not happening all that frequently. A couple times a week, maybe, at most, which is still, that's still something. On the other hand, they're announcing strikes against American carriers. We've got the USS Carl Vinson that just came over from the Pacific Theater, and then the Harry S. Truman has been operating there for a while, and their deployment was just extended. The Houthis have claimed attacks against those ships almost every day for about a month now. Now, we've not heard anything. Right out the gate, the DoD said the Houthis missed by something like 100 miles, which means they borderline fired in the wrong direction. Since then, we haven't really heard anything at all. I do not think there's a high likelihood that the Houthis actually impacted any of our ships and successfully hit any targets, but we don't know if they're continuing to miss. If these attacks are happening at all, could be the case, right? They could just be saying it, although a lot of their other claims, we do actually have some evidence to back it up, so keep that in mind. We don't know if these munitions are getting close to the U.S. ships and they're being shot down, if they're failing en route, anything like that, because we're not hearing anything from DoD on that side of the fight. Now, when we are seeing evidence of these attacks, it's playing out with the drone shootdowns. Now, drones, we'd rather lose a drone than a manned aircraft, 10 times out of 10, no questions asked. But we also can't just completely write this off. The Houthis have shot down 25 total U.S. MQ-9 Reaper drones since 2017. There was one in 17, I think one in 19, and then kind of a break. But really, it's been an uptick recently. A lot in 2024, and then we're spiking now in 2025. Earlier this week, they shot down 2 inside of 24 hours, and we have the footage of those. So I know this is one where, again, this is a terrorist organization, and people say the Houthis, they just make stuff up. I wouldn't believe them. Well, they're bringing the receipts. So I don't, this is, again, something that the United States is not commenting on at all, but these look to me like Reapers that were shot down. So far, we know that 6 have been shot down in April alone. Now, these are slow-moving aircraft. They're much easier to target than, fighter jets piloted by American personnel over Yemen, which are also being used in these strikes. But again, these are $30 million drones. There's a cost there. So this gets back into the question of, what is a war or not? Is it a war when they're shooting our drones down? I don't know. Maybe. Those drones are designed, we're using those to identify targets and or conduct kinetic strikes against Houthi militants and Houthi positions. So these are not one-way attack drones. These are not suicide munitions that are designed for one-time use. They're not disposable. The idea is that we bring them back and we use them again. But of course, they're pretty susceptible in the Houthi airspace. Now, I've seen people say, how on earth? Because you see these videos of the munitions down and it's guys running around in sandals, maybe shaking AK-47s, and people saying, How are they doing this? That doesn't make sense. And that's another thing that I think folks are saying this can't be genuine. They must be making it up because there's no way the people that I see in this video here found a way to shoot down a U.S. Reaper drone. Here's the thing. They've got a bunch of Iranian surface-to-air missiles. And the Houthis will claim that every one of these is homemade and, they developed it and manufactured it and tested it and all that inside of Yemen. But based off of everything we've seen, and the Defense Intelligence Agency put together an interesting report about a year ago showing how all of these Houthi munitions, like across the board, are essentially direct replicas of the Iranians. So the Iranians are either sending the munition entirely, like the full missile is being smuggled into the Houthis, which is more and more difficult as time goes on. More likely, we've got parts being smuggled in, and then there might have even shifted some sort of assembly, kind of trained the Houthis, the Yemenis, in how to assemble some of these munitions once they've been smuggled in part by part. There's really not a lot of indications that the Houthis are developing this type of technology on their own. Nonetheless, it's been pretty effective, and a lot of Reapers are getting shot down. Another key aspect here that I just want to call out is it doesn't really seem like anybody else is doing anything here, which is interesting. This is essentially the United States versus the Houthis, and that's it. I mean, we can include Israel here for sure, because again, the Houthis' claim is that the reason they're doing this is because of Israel's war in Gaza, and Israel has been on the receiving end of Houthi munitions, Houthi missile and drone strikes recently. But the last time the Israelis actually did something against the Houthis, you got to go back to December 2024. So it's outside the range of this most recent uptick in U.S. strikes. We have not had coalition help in the last 38 days. And I feel like that's notable. But at the same time, the Houthis haven't really had any help from their allies, namely the Iranians. There's some reports of Chinese companies helping with targeting, but it's really the United States versus the Houthis. The British assisted with an attack, and some other allies as well, back in May 2024. Nothing since then. Also in that time period, we know that the British shot down some Houthi munitions in the Red Sea. The last known interception from a British vessel was back in April 2024. We got this map here from Intel Schizo. It looks like there are still allied ships in the region. It's not clear to me if the Houthis just are not targeting them at all. It does not appear that any of these are involved in strikes against Houthi positions, but just based off this map, it looks like there's a Greek vessel, French, Italian, and I did see some reports that the British HMS Duncan is still in the region as well. But this, as of now, this is a U.S. versus the Houthi fight. And we're really not, for better or for worse, we're not really seeing it spill over in any direction. I would very much like our allies to get involved if we're going to be the ones down there striking these targets day in and day out, but it's also kind of nice that the Iranians are kind of sitting by and don't appear to be doing anything overtly to help the Houthis, nothing new to help the Houthis at this point. But nonetheless, again, call this what you want. I feel like war is probably the best way to describe it as it sits today. But I did promise earlier that we're going to get into this Houthi Special Forces training. This is a part of their ongoing threats. So let's go ahead and get this playing. And a lot of their talk recently has been focused on the United States and Israel. UK is kind of fallen out of favor. They're not threatening the British as much as they used to. And you'll see that. I think the poor Brits, they don't even get their flag stomped on by the Houthis anymore. There you go. Israel front and center. Again, right on the camera. The Houthis refer to this as their special forces. That means something different in every country. But, to be clear, it's not the most intimidating thing in the world. They end up with some, obstacle course maneuvers here. This is borderline, drill and ceremony at this point, isn't it? It's an interesting mix of, they do get into some training. Yeah, this is almost like something you'd see at a basic training, drill and ceremony type stuff. Little pass and review. They've got the arrow. All right. Marching band style. Look like the haka. The opening move to the haka. Have you seen that? New Zealand Blacks rugby team. I wonder what audience this is designed for. Because a bunch of guys in fatigues doing air squats is not generally viewed, well, push-ups, so maybe, not generally viewed as the most intimidating thing. What is that little maneuver? What do you call that? I know that one, but that. Anyways, this was not, there were no subtitles. Here we go. Got some obstacle course. This was not put out in English, so sometimes they do put some graphics and videos out dubbed in English. You can tell who the audience is there. Maybe this is more of a domestic-focused audience. Finally, we got the obstacle course. Nice to know that the obstacle courses are universal around the world, right? Oh, I don't know about sliding down that pole. All right, there we got it. We got the flaming hoops. The video wouldn't be complete without it. I feel like my military career was a waste because I never once got to jump through a flaming hoop. I got to jump through a tire during an obstacle course in college, but that's not the same. Really feel like I missed out. This is interesting. I like that they've got the GoPro on the dude in the middle. I don't know that, when you're talking about the challenges, oh, God. Oh, right. Oh, wow. Okay. The challenges we would face in fighting the Houthis wouldn't necessarily be here. But it's, oh, there we go. The Brits made it onto that target, it looks like. Welcome back, guys. So the challenges here would be, again, the nature of kind of fighting through these hills. That's interesting. They're passing behind each other while they're shooting. Surface air missile systems, of course, some of their longer standoff range munitions, unmanned surface vessels, things like that pose a... What was that? Why did something go boom behind the targets? Just some visual effects. Yes. It was a little too vanilla for me until we started bouncing on the oil barrels. I think that wraps up. We don't need to see what the Houthi leader says, so we'll call it at this point. But look, that's about where it sits right now. Again, I feel like it's just important to kind of call out. It looks to me like this is a hot war with the Houthis. I don't know if there's a different term we want to use to call it something to make us feel better, but it's something we have to keep an eye on. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.